People with disabilities are taking charge of their own lives. At home, at work, and at play.
The great outdoors.
Yeah, but how accessible is the great outdoors? We'll find out later in this special edition of DNet, the Disability Network. I'm Joe Coughlin.
And I'm Susan Pettit. As usual, we begin with a roundup of disability stories, this week from around the world.
A report on U.S. television says up to 40,000 disabled and seriously ill children are being held in concentration camp-like conditions in Romania. According to the ABC program 2020, the children have been written off as unsalvageable. The Romanian government admits only to holding 8,000 children. The children are often kept naked, near starvation, and close to death. Powerful chemical tranquilizers are used routinely to sedate the children. Some children have been misdiagnosed with no abnormalities or only minor ailments. Romanian authorities say they do not have the money to improve conditions or to abolish the dozen or so institutions where the children are kept.
The annual meeting of the Canadian Association for Community Living is being held in Victoria this week. One of the major workshop programs was organized by the National Aboriginal Network on Disability. The network used the sessions to bring Native disability issues to the national agenda for the first time. Dr. C.P. Shaw from the University of Toronto spoke to the conference about his survey results, which show the rate of disability in the Native population to be at 28%, more than double the national Canadian average. We asked Dr. Shaw for his reaction to the results.
No, we were not surprised looking at this high rate because I've been working with the Native groups for the last almost 15 years. And if you look at the chronic illnesses, which predisposes to disability to a great extent, is very, very high chronic illnesses like high blood pressure, the diabetes, chronic ear problems, and also the sequelae of acute illness like meningitis causing the deafness or mental retardation or cerebral palsy. That's a higher level down there.
The Canadian Paraplegic Association held a medical symposium on spinal cord research this past week. The Halifax conference featured research reports by leading experts from Canada and the U.S. CPA spokesman Greg Pick, commenting on the current state of research, said scientists are 3 to 5 years from solving the riddle of the spinal cord, and maybe that's close to a breakthrough.
Michael Owen Perry is a convicted killer on death row. The medication he is on has an unusual side effect. It could speed up his death. The state of Louisiana wants to force him to take his psychiatric medication because it renders him legally sane, and therefore he can be executed. Mr. Perry is diagnosed as having a schizoaffective disorder. He was sentenced to death for killing his parents and 3 other family members. His lawyers say the forced medication would be punishment, not treatment. The matter is before the U.S. Supreme Court.
Man's best friend has long pointed the way for people who are blind. Now the Pacific Assistance Dog Society in Richmond, British Columbia has started training dogs to help physically disabled as well as deaf people. We have this report from Bob Nixon.
Clyde, get your leash.
Meet Clyde.
Good boy. Bring it here.
He's a 2-year-old black Labrador.
Give.
Clyde's trainer, Patty Shafransky, is paralyzed below the waist. She's taught Clyde to recognize 89 separate commands.
Clyde, up. Down. Clyde, late. Go. Yay, good boy. Off.
The Pacific Assistance Dog Society hopes to train a lot of dogs like Clyde. When the phone or the doorbell rings, Scruffy will lead a hearing-impaired person to the source of the sound.
What is it?
Many people have found the dogs give them more independence than what they thought the fates would allow. Bob Nixon,
That's
CBC
it. Good
News,
boy.
Richmond.
Bring it here. Good boy. Good boy, Clyde.
In tough economic times, finding a job can be difficult, and it can be even harder if you're disabled. In Ottawa, several hundred disabled people got a chance to market their skills and to meet possible employers. It was part of a job fair, the first in the city for people who are physically or mentally disabled. Margot McDermott went along to check out the prospects.
It's sometimes difficult for disabled people to apply for jobs and for employers to know what disabled people can do. That's what this fair is all about. Some businesses say this job fair has opened their eyes.
My personal view of what a disabled person was someone in a wheelchair. Well, that's not the case. You can have some people that can sit for only a certain period of time and stand for a certain period of time. Well, there are jobs in the bank that do work towards that.
This fair doesn't mean that people walked away with jobs, but organizers were surprised at the number of people who came. And it appears that at the end of the day, some job negotiations were in the works. Margot McDermott, CBC News, Ottawa.
And that's this week's roundup of disability news. Outdoor and leisure activities are often looked on as being trivial, but they're another piece in the picture puzzle of overall human rights. A critical piece, according to a recent report commissioned by the Ontario Ministry for Community and Social Services.
The more we see people with disabilities out fishing, cottaging, skiing, camping, the more they'll be accepted as full partners in society and not seen as second-class citizens, stuck away in a few segregated locations. It's an acceptance that goes hand in hand with and acts as a catalyst for the integration of people with disabilities in the areas of employment, housing, and transportation.
Today we'll hear from people who are getting outdoors and taking part in mainstream activities. We'll find out what choices are available and what the obstacles are. We met with people taking part in a conference on outdoor opportunities. It was held at Geneva Park in Orillia, Ontario. One of the obstacles identified by the people there is physical access. Paul Thompson has multiple sclerosis and uses a wheelchair. He's enjoyed fishing all of his life.
Since I became disabled, I became more interested in fishing, and it was a sport that I could compete in. And
he lives in Keswick, Ontario, not far from Orillia, and he's been introducing other people with disabilities to fishing. Physical access to the sport has improved, but he still thinks there's a long way to go.
The major barrier has been accessibility and docks. The town of Orillia have an excellent facility that is accessible. I think it's one of the best in the province. And there is funding available to make docks accessible, but unfortunately, a lot of the politicians don't let everybody know about this funding, and the towns and the people don't know that there is funding available for them to be able to put in a marina that's accessible. So that's the major barrier right there. In boats, Princecraft built a pontoon boat, and they build it handicapped accessible with 36-inch wide doors. They take out the furniture, and you can put 10 wheelchairs on board one of those pontoon boats. So anybody can go fishing. Doesn't matter whether you're in a chair or not.
Give it a good toss and just let her go.
Jim Miller, who lives in Victoria, BC, fell asleep at the wheel of a tractor trailer 6 years ago, and he now uses a wheelchair. A country boy, he's always been active outdoors and loves water skiing and snow skiing.
For me, it's getting out there, and it's fighting with that rope, so to speak, or that ski, and beating it and having a really great run.
Miller thinks that lack of both information and networking are barriers that keep more people from getting outdoors. So how did he get back into skiing after his accident?
Actually, I was in my dentist's office, and he's drilling away, and they like to load up your mouth with everything and then ask you a question. And his question to me was, do you know anything about snow skiing? Because I just came from Blackcomb, and there was a guy in a wheelchair that jumped in his ski, he didn't even know what to call it, and skied all over the mountain and up and down on the lifts all by himself. He said he skied better than I did. Well, I just about grabbed him by the throat and kept pulling information out of him because I couldn't believe it. At the time, I was having some difficulties dealing with family and friends, going away on the weekends and skiing and having a good time, and then coming home, and then I'd have to listen to the stories of the great time they had, and I was kind of negative. I didn't deal with that end so good. So here, I just couldn't believe it. I got on the phone and phoned around Canada, and I couldn't find anything else. So I started phoning into the States and got connected with a fellow in Seattle that was building this type of equipment, and just took it from there, completely by fluke, which kind of upset me. I mean, I couldn't understand why the rec therapists or different organizations in Canada that deal with wheelchair sports and recreation and stuff why they weren't networking enough to let the disabled population know their options. And that's what it is. We need to give everybody options so that they can choose what their interests are.
Miller believes a lot of that networking and sharing of interests could be taken over by disabled people themselves.
I think the information exchange sometimes doesn't happen enough because of the disabled people not getting involved in it themselves and looking for new avenues of recreation and sport. And it's coming now. You know, I think the disabled people need to get involved in running their local programs and having their say and reading and watching what's going on in the rest of the world and bringing it back home all the time. We can't always wait for the able-bodied population to come along and say, hey, we've got this activity plan for you, why don't you come along and do it? It shouldn't. That's great, but I think the disabled people have to say, hey, I'd like to try mountain climbing or skydiving or hang gliding or whatever it is. Let's go out and find some people to help us that know how to do this already, and let's get at it.
I'm relaxed on this one that's holding my chest right now.
Ross Watson lost his sight when he was hit by a BB from a pellet gun when he was 12. He's always been drawn to the outdoors, and he's currently manager of a lodge in Kananaskis Country in Alberta. This year, he took part in a 9-member expedition up North America's highest mountain, Mount McKinley, or as the natives call it, Denali. Watson says public attitude is another obstacle that confronts people with disabilities when they try to integrate into outdoor activities.
There's a couple of schools in the United States that do some fairly high-level training in outdoor skills for people that want to, pursue them, whether they be in kayaking or mountain climbing and stuff like that. And I applied to those, and they suggested that they're not really too interested in taking disabled persons in them because they lower the quality of their program. But I was a little offended, and I tried to sort of justify where they are coming from. But, they could have done it a little more tactfully. They could have just said that, that we don't really believe that you possess the skills or the ability to keep up with the group. And, and there's a lot of outdoor pursuits that have to test people to make sure they're not taking them into an environment where they're going to be in a dangerous situation. So, like, basically for a school to say, nope, we don't take disabled persons, they could say, well, we do, but first prove to us that you can do it.
Kids with disabilities have traditionally been shipped off to segregated camps during the summer. It's given them a chance to get outdoors, but the experience has not promoted a sense of independence or integration. Now, I never went to segregated camp, but you did.
Yeah, I had to go for 11 summers, and I kind of missed my friends because they didn't come to camp with me. Camp Awakening in the Haliburton Highlands of Ontario is an exception, a camp that promotes independence and integration.
With an emphasis on canoeing and rugged outdoor expeditions, the program is run in cooperation with 2 regular summer camps, Kilco and Gay Venture. Keith Bertel has been going to the camp for 6 years.
At Camp Awakening, we'll kayak or canoe for, 5-day trip in the middle of nowhere.
Camp Awakening was developed 8 years ago by Harry McMurtry, who has worked at segregated camps in the past. I asked him how they integrate disabled and able-bodied campers.
I think it's primarily their decision. If they want to hang out with their able-bodied peers and contemporaries, then that's their decision. We also make programming decisions. We try to do a lot of integrated activities, whether it be a water polo game, a floor hockey game, do a canoe trip together, any kind of activity. But again, I would say that spontaneous interaction is probably the greatest form of integration we see at our camp.
You've worked in both segregated settings, and now you've worked in an integrated setting. Can you give us some comparison of the way that the disabled campers feel as a result of the integrated experience?
I think much more positive about themselves, certainly feeling as a more full participant in the community. I don't think anybody wants to be segregated or treated differently. I think that's very key. I might add that that there is some comfort for children with disabilities to be around other children with disabilities, and I think it can be a real learning experience as they have a sense of familiarity. And but basically, I think there's no question that the integrated setting is a much more popular setting, a much more desirable setting.
While Camp Awakening emphasizes independence and integration, its rugged activities make it suitable only for disabled people who are quite agile. Another camp, Freedom Tours, located in Alberta, caters to people with more severe disabilities. Andy Stone, who operates Freedom Tours, has come up with many innovative schemes to get people outdoors. His most recent, a hot air balloon accessible to wheelchairs.
You just have to take standard equipment, make it accessible. In the case of a balloon basket, you have a ramp at the end of the balloon that folds, the basket that folds down. You back the person with his or her chair into the basket. You tie them down with mechanical tie-downs. You have the person wearing his or her lap belt, and then you put a 5-point race-style harness on them to hold them and secure them into the basket.
Stone's adaptations, such as those on the basket, are meant for disabled people, but they're also appreciated by others.
I find it's easier to walk up a ramp than a set of steps. As far as the electric door openers, like an able-bodied will 9 times out of 10 go for the door opener or the door knob, but if the able-body's got a bag of groceries, it's just as easy to hit the old button on the door opener and it opens for you. The hot tub, the only difference in accessibility is that there's a lift on it. An able-body can still get in on his own. The horse carts are such that we have 3 bucket seats that are all detachable. You can put a wheelchair on it, you can put a bucket seat on it. Able-bodied people can take it. Grandpa and Grandma want to go out and get behind a horse for the first time in 30 years. They don't have to be disabled to do it. Every piece of equipment we have can be offered to the able-bodied community. The balloon, for instance, with that ramp feature that's on it, we can do weddings with the darn thing, because up till now the bride's got to climb in over the edge and get her dress dirty, do a tether, it's a big deal. Now they just walk in, walk out, no more problems.
While summer camps are beginning to offer integrated programs and Freedom Tours offers support services to people with more severe disabilities, mainstream resorts are falling far behind. Geneva Park is an exception. Accessibility there has been upgraded annually since the late 70s. Miriam Fraser is the conference and marketing coordinator for Geneva Park.
Any comments from able-bodied guests who come up and say, you know, gee, I really don't want a room that it looks too institutional or anything? Do you ever get any comments like that?
Actually, no, we get more comments of, wow, isn't this great? You're doing something. You know, they often go, a lot of the conference people go downtown Toronto and they see stairs and they see washrooms that aren't accessible. So when they do come to a place like this and they see that we're making changes, attitudes out there are changing, I find, and they're just pleased that we're trying to do something.
Traditionally, buildings have been designed for able-bodied persons 20 to 40 years old. George Swender runs a workshop on barrier-free design for Equity Outdoors. I asked him what makes a building barrier-free.
Well, I think there's, I guess the easiest way to put it is ease of movement for anyone, so that people who are, let's say, mobility impaired or sensory impaired, people who are semi-ambulatory that can get around but use a variety of walking crutches, aids, canes, you name it, temporary disabled or permanently disabled, so they can get around with ease. And that includes the removing of barriers such as stairs, uneven surfaces. It means marking things accurately. It means lowering switches in some cases, light switches. There's a whole variety of, I guess, design features. I think the important thing is that people who are planning have to address or talk to the users. And we're talking about barrier design as a process as opposed to some sort of a prescription that says this is the way you do it. We say this is how you should go about it. This is who you go to find out how to do it. The experts are amongst you in the community. Go to them and find out how to do it.
Now, I'm sure you can count the number of barrier-free resorts in the country on 1 or 2, possibly 2 hands. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's first of all awareness. I think the level of awareness has been changing over the last number of years, but it still has not reached a point where a lot of resorts or facilities have adopted that barrier-free design, and they have not looked at the market of people who have disabilities. They haven't actually addressed that and said, yes, those are people who we want to market to.
What is the market?
Well, the market, if you look at it statistically, in Canada, this was a health survey done in 1984-85, showed that 13% of Canadians would, over the age of 15, would be considered to have a permanent disability. So the market is actually those people, but it's not restricted to those people. The market includes everyone who goes anywhere with those people. I mean, you don't usually travel alone. So if you're with someone who may have a disability or mobility impairment or temporary disability, and there's a range of other users that can be affected, then you're also affected by it. So we're actually talking about 30%. The United States Park Service did a study several years ago, and they actually went up to as high as 50% of users would require or benefit from barrier-free design.
According to this report on leisure and people with disabilities, they should be able to make informed choices about recreation and have control over those choices. Disability agencies should act as advocates, connectors, and supporters rather than as providers of services and programs.
Herb Gray is a consultant on recreation for people with disabilities with the Ontario Ministry of Tourism and Recreation. I asked him how those agencies could get out of the business of providing direct service.
Getting right out of the business is going to be hard for the people who are caught in the middle. I mean, it would be nice if we could jump from A to B. And so the person with disability isn't kind of caught in the middle. But the service providers have been, the existing organizations that deal with the disabled have been providing that service for a long time because nobody else has. But what they have to now take on is the responsibility of linking the two together, like linking the person with a disability and the municipal recreation department, for example, together, rather than the association providing the program for the person with a disability. I mean, that's a never-ending process. Once the association person deals with the municipality and the municipality overcomes their attitude or their myth or gets a clear understanding, we'll gradually not need the associations anymore, which is a perfect situation. I mean, we have to. They can't stop what they're doing. I guess it's the people caught in the middle, but they shouldn't do it 100% of the time anymore. They should quit providing 100% of the program and maybe provide 50% of the program for the interim and spend the rest of the time working to bridge the gap, be the facilitator, the coordinator, the advocate, the helper, to get people into existing services that are provided in the community, whether it's profit-making services or it's municipal services or it's services run by the volunteer associations. But they have to quit trying to control the person with a disability and keeping them to themselves.
Do you think there's a fear on the part of some of those organizations that if they get out of the direct service provision, they kind of lose some control that they've had in the past?
I think that is a problem, and they shouldn't worry about that. And they're doing a greater service to the community, to themselves, and to the individual by becoming the link, becoming the facilitator. I mean, what greater accomplishment could they ever say if they were able to get one person a year, for example, into a community recreation program, so they would never see that person again. I mean, if you ever thought back on what did I accomplish in my life, I mean, that's a major accomplishment. I mean, if we look back on what's happened in the last couple hundred years, I mean, one person integrated into a program is a fantastic success. So we've got to quit worrying about the problems the person with a disability is going to have and let them make up their own mind, but help them have the freedom to choose.
We'll be watching to see what happens with the recommendations of that report.
That concludes our look at outdoor activities. If you've had any experiences you'd like to share, you can write to us at Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W1E6, or you can fax us at 416-975-5636.
And that's our show. I'm Joe Coughlin.
And I'm Susan Pettit. We'll see you again next week. We better get our gear ready, Joe.
Yeah, because we've gone fishing.
When you're on McKinley, you know, you're sitting up at the highest point that you've ever taken yourself to. On McKinley, we didn't reach the summit. The weather drove us down, but we made it to the top of Denali Pass, which is 18,200 feet, and that's Canadian Rockies are 10,000, 11,000 feet, you know. To be at 18,000, I climbed higher than most of the people that live and work in the mountain areas that I lived in, you know, and up there and knowing that I took myself to that point felt good. It's just me getting there. I think that's it.